And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Welcome to Open Connection. I'm your host, Robert Pictou. Our show today comes to you from the traditional and unceded territory of the Tsimshian people. Before European contact, Indigenous peoples in what is now Canada lived in diverse, complex societies with sophisticated cultures, economies, and governments, thriving on their own territories and utilizing the resources of their environment. On today's Open Connection, we'll bring you part 2 of Indigenous engagement with Maynard Angus.
All that, but I cannot talk specifics. I won't talk for the Haisla. I won't talk for the Tsimshian people or the Haida people. I can only talk for the house that I'm coming from. So when you ask me questions, I can generalize, but there's also some other people in here that probably can answer it better than I can. But I want to create this safe space where if you have a question, and I don't know if I've seen this anywhere, I'm sure it's probably happened before, but ask me anything. And I'll try to answer to the best of my ability. And if somebody has a better answer than I, or has an answer than I don't, please feel free to feed into this conversation. All right. So I'm going to open the floor, and I'm going to open my kimono. Ask me anything.
Maynard, we've got somebody over here who has a question for you. To get your hand up there. Can you introduce yourself so everybody knows who you are too, Stephen?
Hey everybody, my name is Stephen Patterson. I'm with Newcrest Mines, and I just have a question. I feel I'm in a really good space to ask it, and I had the pleasure of having dinner with you last night. I hope I laughed at your joke.
It wasn't you.
And I'm thinking specifically of just how reconciliation has always been a one-sided pursuit, just in the sense that going back to the time of Frank Calder, how he went and was schooled in, the other worldview and had to fight on their own battlefield, that if you could share your perspectives on how we may pull that back and make it a little bit more of a balanced approach.
Yeah, so as you know, and this has been stated from many speakers, reconciliation means something different to everyone, and everyone has their own interpretation and understanding of what reconciliation means. So reconciliation is for us, right? So I'm working with a few companies right now, and then the question is, what does reconciliation look like for you? Do you have any success stories that you can tell me about how you're reconciling with the First Nations or how you're engaging with them? What does that look like? You can't do that. You can't go out and say, what's working for you? What's working for you with that nation you're working with will not be the same for how this company wants to deal with reconciliation. But if you want to go to the extreme and have this conversation, and I'm not advocating this, but if you want reconciliation and you're not even involved in any way, shape, or form, but somehow you want to craft up a reconciliation strategy, for example, then what you do is you get to know the people, right? You got to get to know us. And I hear that all the time. It's just like, here's a simple analogy. Before I got married, my wife now, I didn't walk up to her and say, hey, I think you're beautiful. We're going to get married. I want you to marry me. It doesn't happen that way, right? I said, hi, I'm Maynard, and what's your name? And, we got to talk a little bit, and we got to know each other, and her values are the same as my values, and, I think that, this is working out really well. I'm actually feeling pretty good about it, and how do you feel? And, would you like to go for dinner? And, we go for dinner, and the conversation went really, really well, and a few days later, as maybe the flowers came, and let's go for dinner again, and so we're courting and got to know each other, right? And we got to that place where, it's like when you go to the bank, you're going to do one of two things. You're going to either make a deposit, or you're going to make a withdrawal, right? So what do you need to do to make deposits? So you talk about reconciliation, and I heard an elder say this, and this was his interpretation of reconciliation. Said, Maynard, if If when you walk out that door and you leave the room, and if my heart feels happy about our conversation, then we reconciled. Reconciliation just happened. Because now I can trust you, I feel good about what we talked about, and my heart is happy. That's a simple analogy of his interpretation of reconciliation. Right? From that to the extreme, a company has gone and done something to the land, and the First Nations are going, you know what? They destroyed our land, and now they want to reconcile with us. Well, the first thing I think they need to do is they need to come back and apologize. You need to apologize to us first. Unless you apologize, there's no reconciliation. Not going to happen. Are you willing to apologize? If you're not willing to apologize with us for what you did, sorry, we have no conversation. You got to do that first.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Thank you for staying with us. The Beauty Way in Dene culture, represented by the word washo, is a spiritual path and a way of life that emphasizes balance, harmony, and reverence for all things, not just aesthetics, and a way of being in the world. Let us return the conversation as Maynard shares thoughts around empathy.
This came from a meeting, and we were talking about human beings, right? We forget, and for some reason, interpret Canada. Not all, but for the most part, I would say that we forgot the human side of who we are and what we do. You know, I've come from that my whole life was in that world, right? You got timelines, and you've got problems and issues, and you got to deal with every day. There's something you got to deal with, and it just doesn't stop, and you just keep going, and you're not sleeping good at night, and so you got to meet that deadline, and away you go, and you got to deal with personality conflicts, and it's just life goes on, and where there are people, there are problems, and it doesn't stop. And then we go, where's the empathy? Right? Somebody threw it up the window. We got timelines to meet. Who cares about people? Empathy. And that's what happens. So you've got corporate Canada that has to do business at the speed of business. And then you've got the Indigenous people that's going, hey, slow down, get to know us. Both are right. But somehow we got to meet in this third space and say, we got to figure this out. Right? You heard it this morning. We got to work together. We can't do this alone. And so tomorrow we'll be talking about how do you build a resilient economy. You got to do it together. It doesn't happen. It doesn't happen by yourself. I don't know, that doesn't answer your question, but that's a kind of a broad question. It's a big question, but my only answer really to something like that is you got to get to know the people you want to work with. Don't expect to go in there, have a conversation, get your agreement signed, and away you go. And if you have your agreement signed, and away you go, I'll tell companies, you either take your time, or you take your chances. Pick one.
It's good to see you. Laurie Ackerman from Fort St. John. So I have quite a few books at home that I am learning from. And I'm wondering if you can add to that list. Do you have any suggestions on books or any readings?
There's a book that was written, what is it called? There's Helene wrote a book. He's written 2 books, Dancing with Dependency. Yeah. So I've read the first one, but that's a good book to read. There's a CBC did a documentary. First Contact, I think it's called. Does anybody know? Yeah.
Meat Fire.
It's Fire was the other one. But First Contact, I believe it's First Contact, a documentary. It is unbelievable. It actually what CBC did is they took, I think it was 8 different individuals from across Canada, and they're from totally different walks of life, and they brought them together. And these people were like, oh yeah, they're lazy, they're drunkards, or they get everything, they get their education paid for, they get a house, their medical, their dental, I mean, you name it. I wish I had my status. You watch a documentary, and they take them into the communities, and they get to live with the people in those homes, and they discover, oh, right? They're just like us, right? It's like, they told me there were giants in the land, but I got over there, and guess what? They're just like us. And they're nicer than we are. They shared their home, they shared their food, they shared everything with us, and after what they went through Canadian history, you read about what they went through, and then they opened up their home and they welcomed us. That is really, if you watch, I think it's First Contact, and you might find it on APTN as well. Very eye-opening.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Welcome back to Open Connection. Published in 1847, George Copley's autobiography, The Life, History, and Travels of Gakiakibol, was popular enough to demand 7 printings by 1848 and 2 revised editions in 1850. Let us return the conversation with Clarissa Spencer.
Hi there, my name is Clarissa Spencer. I just want to add to the book collection. We speak about our late Samoyed Setsan that just passed away, Mel Bevan. He was an author. He had just written a book called Silent Voices. You can get it at Misty River Books. It is a book in regards to a nation ruled by policies. So when it comes to the Indian Act, how natives across Canada have been ruled by policy, and there is no Caucasian Act, there is no East Indian Act, there is no Mandarin Act, there's an Indian Act, and that is what we've been governed under since the Indian Act was created to do that. So I would strongly suggest reading that. It just came out last year, I believe, and Mel was a mentor of mine, so I held the pen on the final agreement, Kitsilus, throughout the final negotiations with him by my side. So he's been a wonderful mentor, chief, and leader for a lot of people in this room, and I would strongly suggest adding that book to your library as well.
Hi, I'm Kylie Williams. I'm with the Association for Mineral Exploration. One question that we often get from our members that they ask in forums like this, and I think it's a hard one, so I think it's a good one for this open discussion, is what if a company establishes a good relationship with a subset of a nation, but then when it comes to signing an agreement or something like that, other parts of the nation are not in agreement? How should a company approach that, or the people in the company approach the rest of the nation if perhaps there's disagreement and it goes back beyond the project or beyond the current question?
Yeah, that's a tough question to answer, but let me say this. There's 2 ways of doing things in my world. I'm not saying it's right, but there's the best way, and then there's the right way. So for companies, when companies do things, they'll do it the best way. Why? Well, at the end of the day, you got shareholders that want their cut, right? You've got the investors that want their return, and you've got the owners of these companies that say, look, this is my company, I'm invested in it, so therefore I'm going to do what I need to do. So there's a best way of doing things. And when you're thinking about the best way of doing things, you have timelines you've got to meet, right? You've got profits that need to happen, and these things need to occur. And so when you work in that kind of that mindset, you're going to run into that situation where you've signed an agreement, you haven't given it time, right? Take your time or take your chances, You get that agreement signed, and you have no concept or no knowledge of the makeup of the community. The agreement signed, the old saying is it's easy to get into debt, but it's really hard to get out of debt. It's easy to get into a relationship, it's really hard to get out of a relationship. So you are in that situation before you can get yourself into debt or into a relationship. Take your time, right? If you have the luxury of time, which most don't, if you can go into the community and understand the dynamics of the community. Who's influencing who? Are the hereditary leaders influencing the elected officials? Or are the elected officials influencing, right? So if you think about a municipality, it has its borders. Just as a reserve, a First Nation community has its borders. There's a jurisdiction there. The mayor and council of the cities, their responsibility is the jurisdiction of that municipality. The constituents have voted them in, and now they become the decision makers, and away they go. My mother, her brother, my Uncle Paul, had a chief's name. So it goes to the oldest sister's oldest son. That's how the name goes. It stays in the bloodline. So some communities and nations, they're cultural very strong, and so they will follow the hereditary system. So in a case of the Wet'suwet'en, right, you've got the elected officials made a decision, signed the agreement, and then all of a sudden the hereditary leaders stood up and said, hey, just a minute here, I didn't know anything about that. And then all of a sudden there were some challenges for the company. So take your time and take your chances is all I can say. Because every nation is different. And within each nation, they have their own communities. And they're different as well. So you could be different. You could be dealing with one community from that nation, but the other community may not have even thought to deal with that other community, but you thought they're a nation. Because right now I'm hearing, you're saying, so I come from the Nass Valley, and we have 4 communities under the Niska banner, the Niska Nation. There's 4 communities, right? And if you look at the Jimsan or the Tsimshian people, there's 6 communities. But now they're calling them nations. Each community is calling themselves a nation now. Kitsim-Kalim Nation, which is a community under the Tsimshian Nation. But they're saying, so it's confusing to those that don't know. Well, it's Kitsillas Nation and Kitsim-Kalim Nation, Lakwalams Nation, Metlakatla Nation. They're communities within that nation. So when you go in and understand and take your time, I think you're more apt to not get yourself, into this relationship, because it's really hard to get back out of it.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
European-style elections were first introduced under an Act for a Gradual Enfranchisement for the Indian to replace what is viewed as irresponsible system. In other words, traditional ban and tribal government which were viewed as an impediment to the advancement. In this final segment of Open Connection, we return to the conversation with Frank Bush.
I'm Frank Bush with Strategies North Advisory, by the way. But we deal with the same thing. So First Nations will make an agreement with the city, the province, or the federal government. They'll have an election, and then the new government comes in, changes everything. We also sometimes start the courting process with a company, and we kind of really like them, but then their competitor comes in with a far better offer. So then we're in the enviable position of, okay, we like these guys, but what's best for our children at this point, right? So we deal with it too. So I totally understand where your members are coming from and kind of that level of frustration, like, oh, these guys changed their mind. Well, we've got an election coming up in 2025, and if I see the writing on the wall, there's maybe going to be a change of government. We'll all be back to square one. All 634 First Nations across Canada will have to completely reset our strategy for this new government. So I feel what you're saying, and I've been in that boardroom too, but we deal with it the same way as you do. So,
one of the things that crosses my mind, and this is, please, like, I want you to feel safe and comfortable about asking questions, because I think it's important, especially when we talk about residential school. Like, don't feel guilty, and it's not your fault, right? I said this last year, and I think it's important for any Indigenous person or First Nation person to say that to the non, because if we keep beating this dead horse and making you feel guilty, well, I get that. I get it. I didn't go to residential school, so I can't say it's easy. I know it wasn't easy. If you think about who we are as Canadians, you can say you're a settler. I can say I'm first people. But at the end of the day, we're all human beings. We all have feelings. There's so much commonality amongst all of us, and we know that, right? And my tip really is to ask questions, right? If you start asking, and I say my number one tip, if you want to start engaging with the First Nations and you haven't before, ask questions about our culture. When you start asking questions about our culture and understanding who we are, that just opens the door. Tell me, what does a matrilineal society look like? You said you came from the Wolf clan. What does that mean? Like, how does that work? Like, you got a chief and you've got a matriarch, and like, how do you feel? Like, explain to me how that works. And when you start asking questions around cultural aspects of how and who we are and what we do, then we'd love to tell you about that. That would be my first tip, is to ask those questions and listen. I'm reading an article, I've not finished it, but it's on emotional intelligence. When you're talking to somebody and there's a quiz I took, it's 15 questions. And one of the questions is, has anybody ever said to you, you're a good listener? And I put seldom. And the reason why I put seldom was because so much goes on in my head, and somebody's talking to me and I'm thinking about something else to say or ask. Well, I'm not, unbeknownst to me, I didn't realize I was not a good listener. And so I had a meeting today at the City of Terrace, City Hall, and I was meeting with some people today, and I thought, I got to listen. And so I was looking them in the eye, and for most First Nation people, when we're talking, you're talking to us, don't look us in the eye. We look down, right? It's disrespectful to look you in the eye. And so, anyways, I really kind of thought, okay, I got to do this. And so I did. I was listening to her, and when I was looking her in the eye, I was hearing every word she was saying. And at the end of it all, she says, and I kid you not, she goes, you're a good listener. I have never had that before. So it worked. So that'll be my number one tip would be ask the questions, right? Ask questions about our culture. When you start asking questions about who we are, it's just like me asking questions to any one of you.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Open Connection. The greatest distance in the existence of man is not from here to there, but that connects from his mind and heart. If we can conquer that distance, we can soar like an eagle and realize our immensity within. I'm Robert Pictou.